Hi folks, as you can tell I'm really sweating on this video. Unfortunately I don't have much time to do videos and this channel is not how I make a living, so I only do the occasional videos when I have the opportunity, and they're fairly rough, as I'm sure you can tell. I usually only make the videos also when I think there's something that I can actually contribute to the broader discussion. So if I see a lot of stuff on a particular topic, it's probably not worth making a video unless there's something which I think maybe adds to what's already there. In this instance, I've been looking at base layers for cold and wet conditions. I successfully completed an end-to-end through hike of the Bibbulmun track last year, and this year I wanted to do some of the Hasten Trail in South Australia, but this time it's going to be in the middle of winter. Because of the conditions, I want a garment which better manages moisture in cold and wet conditions. I know there are options out there, so before anyone mentions in the comments, I know there are mesh base layers that can be terrific options. I haven't tried these. However, I wanted to keep the weight down and also have a multi-use garment because I don't know what the conditions are going to be like. I think they're going to be highly variable, so I could have quite warm sunny days. So I'm looking at something that'll function as a base layer in colder conditions, but also as a sun shirt. So last year on the Bibbulmun track, I used the garment I was using at the start of this video, which is an IO merino wool sun shirt. And I found that a terrific garment. I actually bought a new one, but after looking into things a little bit, I'm a little bit concerned with moisture management, and I think possibly a synthetic garment, specifically one made of polyester, might be a better choice. So in addition to the wool garments that I've got there, I bought a Patagonia Capilene midweight, which is 100% polyester. I've also got the shirt that I'm wearing, which is by Jolly Gear. This is also synthetic. It uses polyester and it also has other fabrics in there. So those are the garments I'm mainly interested in, but for a bit of a comparison, just as a baseline, I'm not going to wear this obviously, but I've got a cotton t-shirt as well. Now I haven't got the resources to test every brand, so obviously your results might vary. I'm just using what I've got. But I thought this was a reasonable selection. So the synthetic garments are slightly different in their design. Right off the bat, I'm leaning towards using the Patagonia because I've heard that synthetics generally handle moisture better and could be better for those colder, wetter conditions. However, I wanted to test this out myself. Now, other channels have debunked the idea of wicking fabrics. If you really wanted to wick water away, you'd use something like cotton. That's obviously not what you want to do. Cotton's going to hold on to the moisture and you're going to get cold. What you really want to do is to have a fabric that doesn't hold on to the moisture, but rather lets it pass through as vapor and then the moisture is just lost from your body fairly quickly and prevents cooling. Other channels have compared synthetic and natural fibers, and they've done a fantastic job. There's examples where people hike up and down hills, get really sweaty, and then see how long it takes them to get cold or for the garment to dry. Great stuff. And from those videos, the general trend is that synthetic fabrics dry faster and keep you warmer. However, one thing that I feel I can contribute is the effect of long-term use on the garments. Specifically, how salt from your sweat actually affects performance. Now, the reason I thought about this was because I had a yoga mat sitting in my lounge and I noticed one day that it was quite damp. And the reason materials often get damp is that salt that gathers on the surface of some items is what's known as hygroscopic. Now I might not be pronouncing that correctly, but basically what it means is that salt takes up moisture from the surrounding atmosphere. When it's quite warm and dry, the garment or the item will feel dry, but as soon as there's some humidity in the air, so for example if there's an overnight storm or something like that, moisture will enter the garment because of the salt that's on the surface. So I feel that this might affect the performance of the garment. So what I'll do is I'll show you the results that I got. The approach that I took was that I hiked in each shirt in similar conditions for the equivalent of about a week's hiking. And then what I did was I compared the uptake of moisture on the garments in humid conditions between when the garments were clean and when they were salty. I also compared the drying time of the garments between being clean and being salty, so having a week's use. And the other thing that I did was I looked at the odor, so how badly the garments smelled, because different fabrics perform better in terms of their odor management. So I'll quickly show you the results, and hopefully these will inform your choice of garments for the conditions that you're hiking in. I'll finish off with a little bit of a review of each garment and just talk about when I plan to use the particular garments, so what conditions I think they're best for. Okay, so let's start with what I call the hygroscopic test. So this is comparing the amount of moisture that the garments accumulated overnight in very humid conditions between when the garment was clean and when it was dirty, so when it had salt in it. And you can see some obvious differences here. Now the way I did this was I hung all of the shirts up outside on my clothesline. They were undercover and they had protection to stop any rain getting on them. However, they were in a humid environment. What I've got on the y-axis here is the percentage of garment weight that the moisture accounts for, okay, which is my measure of how much moisture was taken up by the garment. And what you can see is that every garment absorbed more moisture when it was salty compared to when it was clean. So my take-home message from this is that if you're not wearing an item at night, so if it's hanging up in a tent or in a cabin or something like that, and it's very wet or very humid, the garment's going to be damp in the morning. Now, how do the different garments perform? The main ones that we're interested in, I think, are the wool garments and the synthetic. And there's a big difference here. So you can see the jolly gear, which is actually made up of a number of different fibers, actually didn't perform particularly well. It seemed to take up quite a lot of water when it was salty. It wasn't too bad when it was clean. The Capilene, which is 100% polyester, performed the best out of all of the garments. And when it was clean, I couldn't measure any water weight at all, so it hadn't picked up any moisture from the atmosphere. So to me, that is the best choice in those damp, humid conditions. It performs a little bit worse when it's dirty and salty, but it's still better than the alternative. Now, the other thing to mention is that natural fibers will tend to take up moisture anyway, so you can see that from the results here. You can see that the cotton and the merino garments still took up some moisture even when they were clean. Now, moving on to the odor, I'll just mention this quickly. This is very subjective, so this was just my sense of which garments smelled the best and which ones smelled the worst. And as you'd expect, the merino garments generally smell the best and the synthetic generally the worst. I did a couple of tests, and the Capilene actually swapped around, so from being the second best to the second worst in terms of smell. But this isn't really surprising. I mean, the natural garments do tend to smell a little bit better than the synthetic, although some of the synthetics do have treatments on that can improve them. The jolly gear, to be honest, it started smelling, I'm wearing it at the moment, it started smelling pretty quickly. I noticed that when I first got it, so even after just one use I started to smell a bit of odour, whereas the Capilene, it took a bit longer before I started to notice the smell so much. So these are the results from the amount of sweat that the garments picked up while I was exercising, so in this case walking home up big hills. And this is probably the least interesting result that I've got because it's highly variable, and part of the reason for this is there's about a 2-month gap between when I did my initial test with the clean garments and when I did my test with the dirty garments or salty garments, and by that stage the temperatures had dropped quite a lot, so I wasn't sweating as much when I was walking. So that's reflected in the height of the columns here. But just as a general trend, again, you can see that the polyester garment, the Patagonia Capilene, performed the best in terms of the amount of moisture it actually held onto. So most of the moisture from sweat was evaporated away from the garment. It didn't hold on to it. Obviously the cotton did fairly poorly. Interestingly, the Jolly Gear didn't do too well for the first test. I actually think this is to do with the fact that it's actually a fairly loose fitting garment, and once it gets wet, your body's not in direct contact with it, so that probably slows the drying process. It also has a hood, which once that gets wet is again not in contact with your skin, so it doesn't get the warmth that would help some of the other garments which fit much better. So for example, the Capilene is a very tight fitting garment, so it's right up against the skin and all of your body heat radiates out through it, so presumably drying it much quicker. And finally, again, I'm not super happy with these results, but here's the dry time. And again, the Capilene performed the best. In fact, it's actually under the times that I've given here, but I was just taking measurements to the nearest half hour. Whereas items, again, like the Jolly Gear shirt, the cotton t-shirt, and the merino base layers take a bit longer to dry. So the natural fibres hold on to the moisture a bit more than the synthetic fibres. The other interesting thing about the Capilene is if you look at the fabric close up, it's almost designed a little bit like the mesh base layers I talked about earlier, in that it has these little circles, or what looks like circles, or areas of maybe a lower density stitch. And I don't know whether that's intended to cause the garment to sit off your skin a little bit in places and allow moisture to evaporate, but that might affect the performance versus, say, a normal polyester garment which has just a standard thread. I'm not really sure. So again, your results might vary. So what does this all mean? Well, let me translate this into my intended use. So first off, cotton. Obviously I'm not going to be using that, but if I was just going for a quick walk in the afternoon or something, you know, and I'm not going onto trails or anything like that, well, sure, why not wear a cotton t-shirt? And in summer it doesn't really matter anyway, because it's hot enough that you're going to evaporate all of the sweat from the garment eventually anyway, and you're not going to get cold. I put the Jolly Gear into a similar category. I actually really like this shirt. In fact, I'm wearing it at the moment for obvious reasons. It has a very open stitch, which makes it a nice cool shirt. It gives you lots of cover. It's got a hood, and you can pull the sleeves down with a thumb hole, so you can actually cover your hands up in sunny conditions. So my intended use for this is when I'm walking to work, where I want to have a nice looking shirt when I arrive, just in case I have to do a video meeting or something like that. I want something that looks reasonable, at least the top half anyway, not so much the bottom half. I may use this in summer hikes. One thing that does put me off a little bit is that it has these buttons on the hands, and I use trekking poles, so I feel they'll tend to wear, or at least get in the way when you're using trekking poles. I also like to use a hat generally, so a hood is kind of an unnecessary addition for me, but for just general walking around town and things like that, or if I'm on holidays, I think it'll be a great shirt, and I intend to use it quite a lot. I'll probably use the IO Merino shirts for summer through hiking, or potentially shoulder season, where I want to keep odor under control, so I don't want to smell really bad when I go into town. And their moisture management is quite reasonable if you're in those warmer conditions where you don't have to worry about the garment getting a little bit damp overnight, or maybe not drying quite as quickly. And finally, for the Hasten Trail and winter walking, alpine areas, things like that, I would use the Capilene. I think this is a great option. Now, if I was consistently in alpine conditions that were cold, say in winter or something, then I would definitely look into a mesh base layer, and that would change the calculations altogether. But I think for general hiking, where you're in a range of different conditions, this gives you the sun protection, but it also manages water quite well. The only thing that puts me off a little bit, my IO Merino shirts actually have something similar to this, where you can put your thumb through and have your hand covered. You can't do that with the Capilene though. It just has a sleeve that comes to the normal position, and it fits quite snugly, so you'd probably have to wear sun gloves if you were going to use this for hiking in fairly sunny conditions. It also doesn't have a hood, but as I said, that doesn't bother me. I prefer to wear a hat anyway.